Why would this building, a school, have anything negative attached to it?
It just got so cold.
There is a dark shadow person, one who delivers punishment. They were using a spirit board.
It terrifies me to think that something can come through this portal and hurt you. I don't want any trouble.
Tell me why you're here.
Bad mojo.
From the haunted heartland in Omaha, Nebraska, my name is Brian Corey, and I welcome you one and all to this episode of the Necronomicast. My guest tonight is John E.L. Tenney. He is one of the most well-recognized and highly sought-after investigators of UFO, paranormal, and occult phenomena in America. He has been actively involved in the field of anomalistic, conspiratorial, occult, UFOlogical, and paranormal research for over 30 years. And over those past 30 years, more than 100,000 people have attended one of John's signature weird lectures in person, and millions have experienced his unique approach in film, on television, in print, and online. He's also an accomplished musician and artist, and we're going to talk about our different experiences in the world of punk rock and how that shaped our worldview. So dim the lights, relax, and settle in for a late night conversation with John E.L. Tenney. Here he is. He's communicating with us over wires of infinity from the realm of the weird. John E.L. Tenney. John, how you doing, man?
Doing well. I hope you're doing well too. I think you are.
I think I am. And something tells me that you're doing okay yourself. I take notes when I'm preparing for a discussion with somebody, and you're no exception. So I'm going to kind of read through a couple of my bullet points here, and then we can start off with the show. When I was thinking about talking with John E.L. Tenney, some things came to mind. Comic books, punk rock, kid rock, Parm Chi, silver coin zombies, time travelers, alien pancakes, ghostly lingerie, alien Bigfoot, real-life elves, and haunted, perverted mall mannequin heads.
That's a good condensed form of my life. That's like 30 years in like 15 seconds.
Let's go for it, man. I first found out about you. I was getting ready to go research, investigate the haunted schoolhouse in Farrar, Iowa.
Yep.
With some buddies of mine. We have a little paranormal troupe, but we don't have matching black t-shirts with skull and bloody fonts, nothing like that.
So you're not a real paranormal group?
I guess not. I guess I'm not. But I watched your show, Ghost Stalkers, in preparation of that. I was just really impressed with your philosophical, your humane, and your thorough research, and just how you approach the paranormal, and just all the topics that are strange and weird, man. And the more I got to know you through the internet and other podcasts, I was just like, man, I got to have John on the show. I just love to pick his brain for an hour or so, and it's so nice of you to be so accommodating and to be on the Necronomicast.
My pleasure. I love Farrar. Thank you for the kind words about Ghost Stalkers. As you know, I'm sure any paranormal show is super problematic. And when we were filming Ghost Stalkers, I did this thing where, because in all honesty, I like to pontificate, and I like to speculate, and I like to talk. And that doesn't make for a great television show. So like what we filmed and what people see is vastly different, because there's a lot of these. I mean, we originally pitched the show as kind of being more of a narrative show with less investigation and more like these breakdowns where Chad would go and investigate. You might see that for like 10 minutes, but then Chad and I would have a conversation after he investigated for 10 minutes. Then I would investigate for 10 minutes, you would see 10 minutes. And then you would have a 10-minute conversation after I investigated. And so the show was really narrative driven. And then like when the network saw it, they were like, why are they talking so much about this stuff? And my thing was like, because we need to talk about it. Like there are questions that everyone has that no one talks about on the television shows. And like, it blows my mind to think that Ghost Stalkers was the first. It was 2014 or 2015, but Ghost Stalkers was the first paranormal reality show out of all of the hundreds that have been on. And I think it's still the only one that has ever mentioned the Psychical Research Society from England in the 1800s. Like, that's crazy to me that there have been literally hundreds of paranormal shows and no one has ever talked about the SPR and like the foundations of ghost hunting. That's crazy to me.
Yeah, I don't think I've ever heard of that group before on a paranormal show. Now, I was familiar a little bit with the Society of Psychical Research from my reading through. Now, I'm a Catholic, and there's an article 10, 11, 12 years ago about ghosts and can you be Catholic and believe in ghosts, and they quoted a member of the Psychical Research. What's his name? I wrote it here. John Newton. Yeah, he's a member of it. And he was quoted at length in this article. So when I saw the show and you guys mentioned that, I was already on board. I was like, oh yeah, I've heard of this. But then you don't see it anywhere else. And such important research. Now I have to admit though, I read a lot, but some of those books, I have them on public domain. Some of those books are really hard for me to read, I mean, so I'm trying to do my research and I'm like halfway through Phantasms of the Living.
Volume 1 or 2?
Volume 1, man. Come on. That, and then there's the telepathy book that I've got that's coming up next, and Genuine or Fraudulent, I think is the name of it. And I'm sure these are old hat to you, but
I republished Telepathy, Genuine, and Fraudulent.
You Oh, for real?
Yeah, there's a Tenney copy floating around somewhere where I've added some extra information and of the time period news articles. And but yeah, I mean, it's crazy because when I say it's crazy that no one's ever talks about it on paranormal shows, it's like all anyone in the paranormal community ever does is like strive to have we need more science. We need more scientific people. We need more learned scholars. And like, here's the foundations of ghost hunting in the 1800s. And it's the most scholarly people in the world.
Right.
Like the heads and chairs of departments at Cambridge and Oxford, and they're researching ghosts and no one talks about them.
Yeah. And it's 2 800-page volume books.
Right. With 5,000 cases of apparitional sightings, like organized and classified.
Yeah, it's too bad nobody's done any research on this stuff, huh?
Right.
Like real academic research on it. Right.
And, the Society for Psychical Research, the thing that cracks me up is, about, I think it was around 1901 when after they had put out Phantasms of the Living and Telepathy and they were kind of moving away from Edmund Gurney and the Sedgwicks and stuff like that, the founders, because they were like, okay, we need to look at something else because we've proved ghosts. So now let's start looking at other things. And like, people forget, they were like, okay, we've got all the evidence. We've set it all up. We've laid it all out. Now let's move on to other stuff.
Sure.
And no one talks about that. And the thing is from parapsychology of that day were born other soft sciences. Psychology was born out of parapsychology. Psychiatry was born out of that too. They were the first people to study recovered memory, post-traumatic stress disorders, because they were looking for how the mind works when it's confronted with horrific situations or traumatic situations. And so they discovered all of these things that we now, like I said, are soft sciences and are studied seriously and academically. And then the other things that people found too loony, like telepathy, which again, you have Brian David Josephson alive right now, who's a Nobel Prize winning physicist who spent 40 years proving telepathy is real and has the evidence to back it up and is a real scientist. I mean, he's got a stamp in England and a Nobel Prize, but people are like, yeah, he's just a crazy guy. Don't worry about him. It's not real.
Well, maybe if he wore like a nice Affliction t-shirt.
Right.
Right?
Yeah, for sure. Yep.
Well,
spiky hair. Well, he does have kind of crazy Albert Einstein hair. So,
well, maybe they need to do some more demonology. That could be too.
Oh yeah, more demons.
We'll talk about now. The birth of this show was like 10 years ago, and I wasn't on the show then. The Necronomicast traditionally is a horror movie podcast, like reactionary, talking about movies and themes and things like that. And then I rebooted it about Well, I joined the show in 2014, and I wanted to do my spin on it with the other guys was we'll talk about the horror of Hollywood and beyond, things that might have inspired horror movies, things that trends in literature and fiction and things like that people made movies out of, and the real life things that inspired horror movies. And so, listening to podcasts and interviews with you after a while, I heard a couple stories I wanted to touch on. You witnessed, and as the Catholic in me, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this. You witnessed an exorcism.
In 1999, a friend of mine who worked for the Archdiocese of Detroit put me in touch with one of the priests there, told them what I did, and they found it interesting. And then the Archdiocese reached out to me and asked me if I would be interested in being what they were calling a disinterested third party for an exorcism, which, how it was explained to me, was when the Catholic Church, when the Holy See, when the Vatican actually sanctions an exorcism, which is not common for what people normally think. I was told at that time, this is 1999, that maybe the Holy See sanctions anywhere from about 20 to 35 exorcisms across the world every year.
Yeah, worldwide.
Now, that doesn't mean that dioceses and churches aren't doing them without the sanctification of the Holy See, but when the Vatican is involved, what happens is the exorcism takes place with a non-Catholic in the room, and you're there to act almost as an insurance agent. You have no stock in the church. You don't have any pull in the church. You don't have any friends in the church. And so you watch for improprieties during the exorcism, and you're a disinterested third party.
Sure.
So I said yes, because whenever anybody asks you to do something weird and it's slightly safe, you should say yes, because that's how you get weird experiences. So, there was a huge process. I had to go to my doctor and get a stress tests. I had to go and I get to pick my doctors too. I'd go to a therapist and get kind of a mental health check to make sure that I was okay. Drug tests. And the whole time the church is telling me, this probably isn't going to happen. Because the client is going through its vetting process. They're, making sure the client doesn't have a mental illness or a drug addiction, or that it could be something explainable. So they were telling me the whole time, this probably won't happen. And then eventually, 3 months in, I got a phone call and they were like, this is going to happen. We're coming to get you. A car came, picked me up, took me to the location where the client was. And I walked into a room and was there for just over 30 hours and then walked out, and then the exorcism was done. And it was a very fucking, excuse my language.
We're grown-ups. We're grown-ups here.
It was a very fucking bizarre experience. I wasn't allowed to interact with the client or talk to the client. The priest and the assisting priest were the only other people in the room. It wasn't the client's home. The way the room was set up is like the Catholic Church has done this for centuries.
Yeah.
They have an order and a way that they do it. And, once you go in the room, you can't leave the room. So there's, the room is always attached to like a bathroom and also has a closet, and the doors are taken off. So that it's a continuous room, but you can go in the bathroom if you need to go to the bathroom. You can go in the closet if you just need to get away from the space and kind of face the wall in the closet. And
was this in the client's home, or was this in the rectory, or was it like a rented place? Or
this was in a home. I never figured out if it wasn't the client's home.
Mm-hmm.
I had never figured out if it was a home that belonged to someone in the church, or if it was a place that they had rented out. I never figured that part out.
Wow. That's insane. I know there is, I'm told, a exorcist in the Archdiocese of Omaha. I don't know who it is. I've tried to kind of feel my way around and see who it might be. It's got to be somebody that's been educated in Rome. But when that's going on, and I'm tying this like into the Friedkin film.
Sure.
Was it already started when you walked in, or was it like we're all meeting outside the room and let's go get them, team? Or was there a pep talk?
When I showed up, the priest and the assisting priest were already in the room, and I was told, like, we're going to enter you now. The client is sleeping, which is what the client did most of the time, was sleep.
Yeah.
And so I went in, and it had already begun. There must have been stuff that happened before I got there, because they were already in there and set up and praying when I came in.
Amazing. So this all goes on, and you aren't allowed to speak to the client.
Not at all.
But the client did say something to you? Did they?
Yeah. So some things that I was prepared for in the advance of going there, don't talk to the client, don't engage with the client. The client is going to try and engage with you. You can obviously engage with the priest and the assisting priest, and if they ask you for something, you can help them. And then they also, they told me, like, it's not going to be like the Friedkin movie. It's not going to be like The Exorcist. It's going to be stranger, because it's not a film, and what you will be seeing is happening in front of you, which is why we need to take psychological tests and stuff. And so there were moments before the client spoke to me where there were things that, to my very unlearned, not a doctor of biology brain, things that seemed very strange, body contortions and movements that did not seem like they should have been naturally available to the human body. The way that they twisted, the way that the limbs kind of twisted. The client was restrained on the bed.
Male, female?
Male.
Okay.
And just some neck movements and some feet movements and the body just seemed very pliable in a way that isn't normal. And then well into the exorcism, the client had been sleeping and woke up and looked at me straight into the eyes, and I kind of locked eyes with him. And very quickly he said, do you remember when you were at the bowling alley when your sister was bowling and your mother brought you that Spider-Man coloring book, and you already had that coloring book, and so you threw it back in her face and you told her you hated it? She carried that in her heart and thinks about you saying you hated her all the time. And what's crazy is to have a memory pulled out of your head. I do remember being at the bowling alley with my son. I remember that Spider-Man coloring book. And that was something that I hold in my heart, because I think that I must have been 8 at the time, but that was the first time I raged against one of my parents. And so it was stuck in my brain, but I had never told anyone about that. And so to have someone divine that out of my head, something that I carry around as kind of guilt and grief in my heart from my childhood, and throw it back in my face. I thought if the client was going to say something to me, he was going to swear or, just try and I've been in punk rock bands. So I was like, yeah, whatever. So to have a person draw that out of my memory, was an attack, and it felt like one.
It's amazing. It's a frightening story. And when you said that, it kind of dived into your brain, when we talk about ghosts later, because I'm sure we will, you were talking, or I've heard you and other people say this paranormal experience is such an intimate experience. And sometimes maybe the spirit world somehow finds its way into your brain rather than materializing in front of you. It fires off synapses in your brain, perhaps, right. Something like that. So this, maybe this happens more than we know. Interaction with the spirit world that we're totally unaware of.
I think it happens all the time. I have a little chapter in the book I wrote, Theoretical Weirdo, called The Discernible Brain. And it talks about the fact that, the most common form of spirit or ghost or communication in the world, cross-culturally and around the world, is prayer. You close your eyes and you think words in your head, knowing that they are being discerned by the spirit world, or hoping that they're discerned by the spirit world. You have full confidence when you close your eyes in prayer that you're not just, those words aren't just locked in your head, that they're going somewhere and that they're being heard or recognized. And so I feel like that aspect of, whether you call it ghost hunting or even having a spiritual connection or a religious belief, there really seems to be a connection that isn't just physical and material, that there's something manifesting and it creates a form, and it's solid enough to bounce light off of itself so that you can see it with your eyes. It seems like sometimes when you see a familiar spirit, someone who's passed, or someone in your family, a friend or loved one, it seems like they are doing something very intimate. It feels like they're looking through your memories of them, and they're finding where they looked the best, or the one that you recognize the most. And they're going, oh, I looked good then. Show him this. And flipping that switch. And I think that in a lot of cases for ghost hunting, I think that a lot of ghosts that we don't have imagery for do the same things. And I feel almost as if we have default settings in our heads where it's like a ghost that you've never seen before looks through your head and says, this person's never seen me. There's no memory of me, but they've seen a silhouette and a shadow before that looks like a man. So I'll just trip that one. And then everybody sees a shadow man, except for like two people who will be like, oh no, he was also wearing like, a tie. Like, it seems like we have default settings in our heads.
Yeah.
And as we get imagery, whether it be through movies or just living our lives or reading comic books, like all of a sudden those images are in our head and they're stored and they're for use later on. And so like if you've seen a crazy movie with some like Exorcist 3 where somebody's crawling across the ceiling, it's like, I'm going to trip that one because it freaks them out and I don't want him here. So I'm going to show him something crawling across the ceiling, and then boom, it's crawling across the ceiling.
Yeah. It's like that little old lady in Poltergeist that knows what scares you. She says right. That in there. Or it's like they're picking out like their Facebook profile pic in your brain in a way,
sure. Yeah. And they might just be trying stuff out. Like, let's see what this one is. I'm bored.
I've been in this house for 100 years, man. I'm tired of these guys coming in, so I'm going to pick something out.
And it's funny too, because but it's like, the other thing is too, we carry with us, obviously, our own individualized ideas about what things look like. So I can't tell you how many times I've gone on a ghost hunt somewhere in an old house that's, from 120 or 150 years old. And someone's like, oh, there's a little girl in a nightgown who runs around. And I'm like, how do you know it's a girl? Like, if you look at a picture of a little boy from the turn of the century or 110 years ago, he's wearing a dressing gown and he's got long ringleted hair and looks like a girl, because that's just how babies and little children were perceived and seen back then.
I'm going to be jumping around a lot here, but the minute you said that, my background is my dad would be 116 years old this year. He was 70 when I was born. And so I have old pictures of my dad when he was a little kid, and it wasn't like a dress, but but exactly what you said. They when they dressed up, they had like maybe like the long pants, but I mean, yeah, totally like that. That's great. Yeah. That's just, sorry to interrupt you when you said that.
It's one of those things like that. We always perceive like, and that's the other thing too. Like, you don't know when you go into a location unless you have like full backstories. But the thing is even with a full backstory, like, you don't know, maybe the woman in the house at the time liked to dress in men's clothing. Maybe the man liked to dress in women's clothing. Like, you don't know who that person was or what their experiences was and how they want to be perceived now, because they couldn't be perceived that way in life. Like, that's the other thing that we do too. Like, I hear people all the time say like that they see like bloody, horrific ghosts and stuff like that. And it's like, so they manifest themselves in their moment of pain, the time that they don't. I mean, I saw an old lady here. She died when she was 85 years old. But she can manifest herself anyway. Why wouldn't she make herself 20 and able-bodied? And if you see someone 20 and able-bodied in a house where an 85-year-old woman dies, people don't think, oh, that's the 85-year-old woman. There's a younger woman here too. It's like, no, how do you know that it's not the 85-year-old woman showing herself as a 20-year-old?
Sure. Now, my mom passed away about 1.5 years ago, and she picked, when things were getting imminent, she picked what photo she wanted published in the World Herald, the Omaha paper, or on, so I see what you're saying about that. Like, you would put maybe not your best foot forward, but I mean, if my mom love you, Mom. If you came back as a ghost, I bet she would be in her 30s or her 20s, and she'd be playing softball. You know, she'd be fit. She wouldn't be, she wouldn't be the ghost that's having trouble walking up the stairs. You know,
Exactly.
that wouldn't be her. What kind of drew me to you too. I love your story, man. Your background of you growing up, it echoes a lot of what I see in myself, and I'll explain how. I was a punk rock kind of kid in Omaha in the 80s. I was born in 74. Like I said, my dad was 70 when I was born. My mom was 40. So I was
Crazy.
raised different than other kids my age, than my friends. You know, our house looked different on the inside, you know.
Sure.
I dressed different. I talked different because they spoke differently around me, and we watched different shows. I was kind of an only child. My sister was 20 years older than me. So I grew up as an only child. So I retreated a lot into comic books and music. Then later, kind of rebelled against authoritative figures. I was in punk bands and alternative bands in the 80s and 90s, and mostly the 90s. Toured around. Always had a love of the paranormal. Watched In Search of, and a great thing in this show's history for me was talking to Bob Gimlin. I interviewed him a couple years ago. So when I see another kind of punk rock guy, you know, it's kind of like a kindred spirit, you know. So
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I've said this on podcasts before, and I say it at my lectures and stuff, but there really is something of, at least in my circle of thinking, my circular thinking, where punk rock lines up with anomalistic research, like not being so locked in. I've said it before, you know, people telling me that I could, like, don't waste your time thinking about Bigfoot. Don't waste your time thinking about ghosts. Don't waste your time thinking about UFOs, was the same kind of mantra chant that people would give to me when they'd say, like, you have to vote this way. You have to vote that way.
yeah.
You can't tell me what I have to think about, and I'm going to think about anything I want to. And so punk rock and Bigfoot and UFOs and monsters and, of course, comic books, like, there was just a way to subvert this middle-class community that I grew up in, you know, and there weren't very many of us. It was, you know, I was born in 71.
Mm-hmm.
And my high school was very, I often tell people, if people saw my high school experience, they would think that it was a very poorly written, trope-filled John Hughes movie. Because, I mean, the most popular guy in my high school's name was Biff, and his girlfriend's name was Buffy. They both had Corvettes. Like, it was ridiculous how much of a movie my world was at the time. And, you know, the football team paid people to beat me up, and I was stuffed into lockers, and, like, it was the 80s in the worst way possible.
Oh, the nicest thing. I mean, I had a lot of friends, and I had a good high school experience, but they called, the nickname of my high school in Omaha was Hollywood High because Nick Nolte went there. So there was a lot of, you know, I was the only kid that I knew that had, like, a single car garage. Everybody else had at least a double car garage and the fancy cars and whatnot. And, you know, the nicest thing that I was referred to sometimes was Orc Dork, because I'm a trumpet player. So I was always, like, in youth symphony and things like that. Meanest thing was, you know, like, if you're in the arts back in the 80s and 90s, you were called a fag. I mean, you know.
Oh, yeah. Yes.
You know, when you kind of deal with that, when I started joining I found, like, empowerment in the music scene in Omaha, because there was a lot of other, not so much misfits, but other people that kind of defied classification, you know. And I, too, didn't like people telling me that the things that I was interested in were, don't waste your time with Bigfoot. Don't waste your time. There's no such thing as ghosts. Well, I don't know. I didn't know then. I don't know now. But don't tell me I can't read about it, or at least be interested. I know what I'm interested in. You know, comic books were pretty cool. It's like a nerd's paradise right now with all the movies that are coming out. You know, all the Marvel movies.
I tell my friend Scott, who I used to work at a comic book store with, I said, you know, for as much as people want to complain about, like, oh, this character isn't like that. This character isn't like that. Like, the nerds won. This was what every nerd wanted. Every major motion picture is a comic book. There are comic book television shows I've never had a chance to watch because there's so many of them.
Right.
Like this, we won. Congratulations, everyone. Everything is nerd culture now. Very good, everybody.
Yeah.
You know, I never thought in the world ever thought that, like, I remember selling like toys, like Star Wars toys and Dungeons and Dragons figures at garage sales in the 80s and 90s, thinking to myself, I will never see these things ever again. And like now I just go on eBay and I type up like, how much is a ROM action figure selling for these days? Then like getting my ROM action figure back. Like, that's okay. That's just a thing now.
Yeah. I had the Nerds One experience like the year after I graduated. There was a kind of a mid-sized club in Omaha. It's gone now. They built a Walmart there. All right. Anyway, it was called the Ranch Bowl. It was like an entertainment center. It had about a 500 person capacity club, bowling alley. It had a radio station that was situated in the back. And then before it died, it even had a recording studio so bands could record there. And the draw of it was like they'd have touring bands in there all the time, like live music every night. And there was a little band that nobody ever heard of called Stone Temple Pilots. Anyway, the weekend before, albums used to come out on Tuesday. The weekend before, they came to Omaha starting their tour. I guess it was kind of like a warm-up before the album came out or whatnot. Stone Temple Pilots came in. They pushed their own gear into this club, right? My band, the Fever Trees, that I was a member of, playing trumpet in the horn section. we opened for them. This is the year after high school. And our band got to use their drums, their amps and all that stuff because there wasn't going to be moving stuff around. Anyway, so we got to use this kick-ass pro stuff. We're on stage opening for this band that's going to be huge in a week. And I look out in the crowd and there's some dudes from high school in there. And I'm like, you guys aren't playing football anymore, but you're paying money to come see me. Come see me play. So it was more of like Nerds 1, Jocks 0 kind of a thing. Yeah. So
give me 3 names of 3 bands you were in. Were you in 3 at least?
Oh, sure. My first band, that band was called Fever Trees. Now there was a band from the 60s called Fever Trees, but we didn't really use the internet back then. And we didn't know until years later that there was a band from the 60s. So Fever Trees. And then I was in a ska band. And that was probably the most popular band. It was called Jimmy Scaffa, like Jimmy Hoffa. Okay. And we used to play, and that was like third wave ska, kind of punk rock. We would play, from Omaha, we played in New York, we played in Chicago, we played in St. Louis, Kansas City. I even have, I'm going to mail this to a friend of mine. Here's our 7-inch right here from 1995. And then the last band, Citizens Band, like Citizens Band Radio.
Right.
So that would be the instrumental jazz rock kind of. We made big concept albums like that. So
right. My first band was Degeneration. That was my punk band. I think we formed that in either 84 or 85, and played with some decent sized, what would become decent sized punk bands like Reagan Youth and Social Distortion.
Oh, I just saw Social D like last year, 2019. Sorry.
Right. But again, playing clubs that held 110 people on a stage that was just plywood and milk crates because it was a bar normally.
Sure.
And then Degeneration went to the New Gods, which was, God, I don't even really know what the New Gods were. Like we had like this one song that was just like an epic, like a rock opera that went on. It was literally like a 20-minute song. And at one point our lead singer, it was crazy. At one point our lead singer would leave the stage and he'd come back with a cape and a sword. And then our drummer's brother would show up dressed as Death and they would have a sword fight during my guitar solo. Like it was the most bizarre band in the world.
Nice.
Then then I was in a 2-piece called Green Wall, which was me. I would always dress up as a female character from a book to play guitar, and our lead singer would always dress up as a classic lounge singer, and we would just do guitar vocals, and the entire set was improv. We never remembered a song. We never played the same song twice. I would just start playing chords, and he would just start singing, and we would just fall our way into songs. And then my last band was Smokehouse, which was a grunge band. Yeah. And guitar solos and melting people's faces and Black Sabbath and all of that.
Yeah. And now, was that the band that you had the experience with Mr. Rock?
With Kid Rock.
Mr. Rock. Yeah. Mr. Rock.
Yeah. So I met Bob. We were recording our first 7-inch, I think it was in 90 or 91. And he was recording a rap album at the same studio. And we didn't have any money whatsoever. And Bob's first albums and cassettes and stuff were funded by his father. His dad's a fairly wealthy car salesman in Michigan. And to be a wealthy car salesman in Michigan is a big deal because we have a lot of car salesmen in Michigan. Yeah. It's the Motor City. But what happened was he needed samples. He needed guitar samples. And so there was one time, that's how I met him, we were leaving and he said, hey, if you lay down some guitar samples for me, I'll pay for some of your studio time. So we did that and became friends and would hang out all the time and go over his house. And he eventually got signed to a label out of New York. And they were he was their rap act, and they asked him if he knew any rock acts. And he said, well, yeah, my friend John has this band called Smokehouse. So they said, okay, we're going to rent out a studio in Michigan, and you will record there, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and they'll record there on Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. And we'll put out your rap album, and they'll be our first rock album. So we were doing that, and my band became a shambles. So what happened was, obviously, Bob was starting to catch a little bit of fire. Mm-hmm. This is way before his Arista record and stuff. So, but he was still very popular. And so like my lead singer and my bass player started hanging out with him a lot and not showing up to our practices and going to his shows and not being prepared at our shows. And it just started to become a shambles. Yeah. And I told them, one night, I was like, this is it. I'm done. You guys are way too caught up with Bob. Like, I'm ending Smokehouse. Like, we're all done. And we broke up. We played one last show. I loaded my equipment, and that was the end of the band. About a year and a half goes by, and Bob puts out Devil Without a Cause, which is a rock rap record. Mm-hmm. And all of the licks and samples from the album that we had been recording in the studio are those songs. So that album is basically us playing those songs. And he would play our songs during his live shows. I have recordings of him playing live in Detroit where he would just outright play our songs, straight, without any rap. And so that's where the relationship fell apart. Yeah. That's the Kid Rock story. He's been a scam artist from day one.
Even without the success, I mean, when bands start getting incestuous like that, it's pretty much over. When they start cheating on you.
Well, fame, it gets into people's heads. That's the problem, right? Yeah. Like, I'm a fairly well-grounded person. Even at that time, I think. By that time I had already worked on Unsolved Mysteries and had worked on a couple television shows. And so, I think I was fairly well grounded. So when I wasn't shocked to meet people who were gaining notoriety or meeting famous people, and even growing up punk rock, like, I didn't care who people were. Like, you were just a guy, like, no matter what you did or how famous you were. And I don't think the other members of my band had ever been experienced to anything like that. So the first time someone seemed to be catching fire or getting some notice, that kind of overwhelmed all their senses, and bands fall apart.
Yeah, I have to credit my parents, though. Them being older kind of gave me a different perspective on things. And, I didn't get into like a hero worship of the local guys and things like that. It's a crazy story though. I mean, I see parallels of things like that, not on that level here in Omaha, but when guys get together in a band, it's like a family, and sometimes it's dysfunctional as hell, and people are opportunistic as a virus sometimes, and they,
I'll tell you a weirdly silly and yet dark moment, which was, so a couple years ago, the drummer for the band Smokehouse died.
Oh.
And he was like, for me, he was like the closest member of the band to me. His name was Mark. And so I went to his funeral, and of course, my bass player and lead singer are there. They're friends with him too. And we're all kind of talking, and we hadn't really talked in years. And the girl who was our manager at the time says, like, the three of you should go up together. And so there's this hearkening back to 15 years ago when we were a band. Like, we're all very different people now.
Yeah, sure.
And of course, everybody was looking at us like, the band is back together, except Mark is dead. It's very strange, very, very fucking odd. And so I'm like, whatever, I don't care. So we go up, and, his cremated remains are in the front of the funeral, and I'm standing next to Joe and Tim, and we're standing there, and Tim, the singer, looks at me and he goes, well, this is really fucking weird. And I looked at the two of them and I said, what's even fucking weirder is one of us has to do this 2 more times.
Oh, man. There's a lot of truth that's said in jest. Oh, my God.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, man, that's crazy. Yeah. I mean, sometimes, they're your band guys are your brothers,
You do go through a lot. I mean, you see the best and the worst of them, and you get into some weird experiences with them.
Oh, for real. Absolutely, for sure. Now, you talked about your experience working on unsolved mysteries. How does that, I know you've done it, but I've never heard an explanation. Like, how do you get the call back in the 90s, like, again, before the internet, before you're looking up people's resumes and things like that? How does John Tenney get his name out there to be picked up by this huge show?
It was literally, I mean, for whoever says, I mean, it was true. I don't know how it is now, but it was true that it was just who you know. Like, I was going to college. I thought that I was going to major in like history, folklore major. Like, that's what I was going to do. And I was about a year and a half into college, and a friend of mine who had moved from my hometown of Royal Oak to Los Angeles was like a production assistant on Unsolved Mysteries, and had heard them talking about, we need new researchers. We've kind of tapped the well of researchers that we have. And he said, I have a really cool guy in Michigan who's going to college, studies folklore, and he's super interested in weird stuff. And he used to do magic, because that was a thing too. Like, outside of my punk circles, like, I was also running in these weird, like, Wiccan, pagan, ceremonial magician circles. And so I got a call one day, and he was like, Unsolved Mysteries is looking for a researcher. You don't have to move. You can work telephonically and, mailing them, and maybe they'll fly you to California a couple times, maybe New York. And so I dropped out of college and started doing that.
And the rest is history.
Yeah.
And with that and your lectures, I have yet to see a John Tenney lecture. I've attended one online, but looking over your bio, you've spoken to a football stadium full of people over the course of your career. Like 100,000 people have attended the
over 100,000 now. Yeah.
The weird lectures.
It's super crazy. If you would have told me that I would have somehow figured out a way to make a living out of talking about weird shit when I was, 20 years old, I would have laughed at you. There was no way. I mean, I was doing lectures on a Tuesday night in a public library in nowhere, Michigan, to 13 people. And, the only reason there were 13 people there is because it was raining outside. So 12 of them needed to come in from the rain. And the one guy who did want to see me lecture just wanted to tell me what an asshole I was and how none of it was real.
Right.
Like, And so we were talking, you mentioned a little bit earlier, or we were talking before the show started, like, I think this is the other thing that kind of drew me to stand-up comedy, because like without comedy, I was a road comic. Like, I was traveling around to these tiny little libraries and tiny little community centers, and then I would have to go up for an hour and do an hour's worth of material to try and please people who I did not know and who did not know me, and try and keep them interested. And
with no booze.
That's the other thing too. No booze. Like, it's a dry, tough crowd.
That's a tough room, man.
You know, I had friends that were stand-ups, and a couple of them had seen my lectures, and they were like, "You're actually really funny when you do this, because you know how silly this shit is." And I was like, "Yeah." And they're like, "You should go up and just put together like a solid 6 talking about what you talk about." And so I started going to open mics, and then before I knew it, I was middling, and then all of a sudden I was like hosting like stand-ups, and I still love it. Even I'm not very good at it, but I still love doing it.
Before the pandemic, with this podcast, I've had the opportunity. We have there's a chain called the Alamo Draft House. Have you heard of the Alamo Theaters?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm kind of like the guy that introduces all the horror movies. Every Friday the 13th, I introduce them. And so I do like a good 5 minutes. And it's usually, I talk about, if it's an 80s movie or something, I talk about who the stars are, I talk about how weak the plot is, or how shitty the timeline is between the different sequels and everything. But I've never gone up and done the stand-up comic. I've tried to be entertaining, but it's harder than hell, man, to go up there and put some material together and say it in front of a crowd. And that crowd wants to be there. They paid $10, $12 to go see Friday the 13th Part 3, and I'm up there telling them how it sucks, but it's awesome.
Right.
Well, a lot of the time they enjoy it, you know, but
I think the other thing too, like sometimes, and you know, I can be critical of others, but I'm most critical on myself. But the thing that drives me a little bit crazy is in this era of podcasting and video blogging and whatever, like there is something about having the experience of speaking to people when you're doing a live spoken lecture. For a long time, friends of mine said that I wasn't even a lecturer. They said I was a monologist, that I was just a storyteller, that I knew how to hold an audience and I knew how to tell a story, and it didn't even really matter what I was saying. And there's some truth to that. And you learn to watch your audience, and you learn what their movements mean, and you can see when they start to wriggle. And so you know that, no, I've got to give them something to latch onto here. I got to make them laugh. I have to make them cry. Like, to get up and stand at a podium and just present information for an hour can be fine, but it's very academic and it's very boring, and it's not for me. You know, whenever I do a lecture, I tell people I'm not going to stand still. I'm going to pace the stage like a panther, and I'm going to say whatever comes into my mind, and the audience is going to lead me to what I'm going to talk about. It drives Amy Bruni from Kindred Spirits crazy, because she books me for these events that she does, and she wants to say, like, what's the name of your lecture? And I always tell her, I don't know what I'm going to talk about until I start talking.
Right.
And so she started putting on her website, like, John is just going to talk about what he talks about. Like, I can't be caged.
You can't be caged. It's like mutual friend Johnny Hauser. He is just over the river in Iowa. And in Omaha, we have a thing. It's a paranormal convention conference. It's called Haunticon. We were supposed to have our third one last year, but it's been postponed to this April. So you can get your tickets now at haunticonomaha.com. Okay. So, but Johnny, he came up and I introduced him, and ladies and gentlemen, you know him from these shows, and here he is, Johnny Hauser. And Johnny, the first thing he said was, I don't know what I'm going to be talking about. So let's, so he started talking a little bit of experiences about the Velisca, but then he just kind of rode the crowd, man, as only Hauser can. So he could read the audience. And then the next thing I know, I'm looking at my watch and I'm like, hey man, we got, I think it was Dustin Perry was up next, or somebody, maybe was he next? Yeah. But I'm just like, hey man, you gotta, but he just kind of rode the crowd, and the crowd loved it. So it's like a natural kind of talent, but it's not just getting up there and winging it, you know? So. Yeah.
My lectures actually are, I know they start and end the same, but the middle is completely up to the audience. Like, I don't really know what's going to pop out of my head. And I like to speak, especially doing a lecture, I like to speak quickly because I don't like to censor myself.
Mm-hmm.
And if I start to think about what I'm saying, I will start to choose different words. I'll start to pick out phraseology that's different. And I don't like to do that. So I'll speak very quickly. And a lot of people be like, oh, there's too much information coming at me. And I'm like, but it's all in my head and it has to come out. So it's got to come out like this. It's just going to be a flood of stuff coming at you. I'm sorry.
Hold on, Grandma.
But that also, people have told me, like, that's one of the reasons that they like seeing my lecture over and over again, is that, like, it's such an information dump and it comes out in such a unique way that, like, you can see a lecture of mine over and over again and you might hear some, oh, he said that before, but like now you're catching other things that you missed last time.
Sure.
So I feel like, I mean, I guess it's pretty good. I mean, 100,000 people seems pretty good.
And there's like no topic that you won't cover. I know you talk about conspiracy theories. I know you talk about Bigfoot, of course, ghosts. Do you ever, I mean, if there's like a crowd there and they want to, and you can sense they want to talk a little bit about Bigfoot, do you kind of steer it toward ghosts and aliens? You know what I mean? Like, kind of give them what you want, or do you always tail it to your crowd?
Yeah. So like one of the openings that I have from my lectures is I'll say to the crowd, words are very important to me as well. And I think that people have lost their passion for words in this kind of era of Twitter and the internet. Like, we speak very briefly and we don't really consider what our words mean or even how our sentences are constructed and what they might mean. And so I start off by telling people, like, you know, words are vastly important. And if I were to say that, how many people here think that when they die, they're going to become a ghost? Like, show of hands. And it depends on the audience, but most people will raise their hand. And I'll say, now, how many people here think that when you die, you're going to become an alien? And, you know, 5 or 6 people will raise their hand. And I'll say, how many people here think that when they die, they're going to become a gnome? And, like, people will laugh and no one will raise their hand. But then I point out to them that, like, a ghost, etymologically, it comes from Geist, it means breath. And that's what I said. Do you think that when you die, you just become breath? And most people agreed with that. And then I asked, do you think that you're going to become an alien, which is a French word, and it means a visitor not of here? And a few people raised their hands. And then I said, do you want to become a gnome? And the etymology of the word gnome is a spirit that dwells and is of the earth. And so the one that no one wanted to be is the one that you were probably thinking the most relatable to the idea that you originally had in your head. Yeah. So I can bring up all of those topics with that as a starter. Now I have an in to talk about ghosts and Bigfoot and creatures. And we can go from that. And I can delve into anywhere I want to go from that point forward.
With your 30 years of experience of researching and talking about these things. Yeah. I mean, people nowadays, I mean, when you type an email, unless you turn the feature off, your phone or your computer will start to finish your sentence for you. I mean, you don't even have to think about the words that you're trying to formulate to kind of express something to somebody. It's just like, like, hi, John. Well, let's talk about, and it's already, you know, Google's figuring it out. They already know what I'm going to say. Well, that's not what I'm going to say. God damn it. I'm not going to.
Well, and the thing is too, it's weird because people, obviously Twitter is a place where people love to argue, but it's like, my tweets, even though there might be words misspelled, which happens a lot on Twitter because I'm sometimes writing quickly, but like, it's the even a stupid phrase is kind of crafted by me because I want to say what I'm saying. And so, like, people will attack me and they'll be like, well, you said this. And I'll say, like, no, read the original post. That's not at all what I said. Like, read it instead of seeing the words and thinking you know what I was trying to say. Like, actually read it because I wrote what I meant. And that blows a lot of people's minds too, because a lot of people are just typing bullshit garbage that they don't really mean.
Or they've heard someplace else 100 times.
Right. Or they're just being reactionary to something.
Oh, yeah. Nobody wants to put in some thought and actually construct an idea. Like I was reading your book, you talk about misspellings. You were, I forget, what was the word? Important? Like the first chapter, I'm like, well, who proofread this? And then at the end of the chapter, it's like, by the way, I meant to spell that wrong. I was like,
well, the entire book wasn't proofread. It was proofread. It was my editor, who's a good friend of mine. It drove him crazy because he would redline things and circle things. And I would say, no, this has to stay in because I'm doing like an experiment with words. And so like, even though this might be repeated or this word is incorrect, like you have to keep these ones in. And it was driving him as an editor crazy because he's like, this phrase doesn't work. And I'm like, I know, but it has to be in that order, because with words being important to me, the book is an experiment. There's an experiment that is running with the book, but there's a secondary experiment, which is important to me, which is, can I take the ideas that are in my head and put them in a book, concrete them down, which I hate doing. I hate having an immovable thought. But can I put it in a book, and can I write it sometimes incorrectly and still get the idea across? And so the book is, there's one experiment, what I never talk about, but the secondary experiment is putting out a book, which are, all books are supposed to be edited. All books are supposed to be, proofed. Mm-hmm. But can you put one out that has these kind of high concept ideas couched in a very silly manner, talking about ghost underwear, that's filled with humor, but it's followed by a chapter that is really philosophical and deep, which is then followed by a chapter that's just extremely personal and, bears my soul to people. And then how can people deal with a book that is actually like a human being? It's flawed, it's complex, it's simple, it's wrong sometimes, it's right sometimes. Like, how do you deal with a book that's actually a person?
Amazing. Yeah, that's a lot to think about there. It's kind of, I see a lot of that too, like as a musician. For a while, I was really preoccupied with recording things and trying to get the right take, the right notes here and everything. But maybe I wasn't putting enough emotion into the phrase, like the word phrasing. There's a great book called The Art of Musicianship by this old French horn player named Phil Farkas. And he talks about how important phrasing is. Phrasing to cause someone to understand what you're doing, and to do that with a horn or an instrument like a guitar or something like that. You might make a couple slip ups, but what you're getting to is so badass musically that it doesn't really matter if you slipped on the string or if you got a little spit in your valve or something like that. You can't go back and sterilize everything, because that's what you're getting. You're getting something totally sterile. That's devoid maybe of some emotion that you should have just left it in there, because what you're getting to, what you're focused toward, what you're aiming toward was so important,
That's why I'm such a fan of jazz, because there's so much jazz, so much good music out there that is so fundamentally flawed, and like you can hear through the mistakes, through the sometimes incorrect phrasing, you can hear what the artist is actually trying to get through to you. I find that a lot in listening to the piano playing of Bill Evans.
Oh yeah, sure.
Like there is just this complex structure going on that is just amazing. But then when you start to listen to it, you're like, oh, but it's totally wrong. And it's way simpler. There's another way to do this, but he's not doing it that way. And why would he do something harder and fail at it and still release it? Like it's really amazing.
Yeah, I totally know what you mean. I was listening to one of my favorite jazz trumpet players is a guy named Lee Morgan. And Lee Morgan, when he was playing with John Coltrane, he was like 18. You know what I mean? Just like hanging out with all these amazing players that are older than him, and just living the jazz guy's life back then. So, I mean, a hard life. I mean, a lot of drink, and a lot of screwing, a lot of all that kind of stuff. And he's playing a solo on this tune called Moment's Notice. And it's just badass all the way through. And then, like, if you really listen to it at the end, he's getting tired because he's just been playing like 3 courses of some kick-ass licks. And at the end, he's just about out of gas, but he finishes it, And, nowadays they'd be like, oh, no, why don't you go have a smoke? Let's do another take. We'll keep that one. We'll file it over here. No, that was the take, man. That was the take. That's life.
Yeah. If you listen to, I did countlessly because I was in a grunge band, but like if you listen to the first Black Sabbath album, Black Sabbath,
yeah,
it is so fucking messy. Like they are coming in at the wrong time. Ozzy is starting like 3 seconds late. Like it's just hysterical, but that album just is amazing.
Yeah.
And it's got such like, there's such feeling behind it. And it's a disaster of an album. They are all over the fucking place.
Right. So like, let's tie this into a little bit of spirituality or paranormal kind of stuff, because a lot of times what I was saying, like, what they're getting to is so badass. There's like, a psychic connection. You know what the bass player's getting ready to do. You know what the drummer's going to do. You listen to his foot, and then without even knowing it, you're playing the same thing that his ride cymbal's doing, or you're following that. There's like a connection, interconnection, intuition. You know what I'm saying? I mean, there's.
Yeah, I talk sometimes to my other musician friends and people who are interested in music. I feel a lot of the time the closest I come to actually having a back and forth communication with a larger intelligence or a larger spiritual world is when I'm playing guitar. Because sometimes I just find that riff or I find that note and I'm like, oh, where the fuck did that come from? Like I shouldn't have not done that. Like, and this song is becoming something like but it's not me. It really isn't. I know how I write songs.
Yeah. And
the songs that are the best are not how I write songs.
Yeah. My fingers have never been in that combination before in that space of time. And I'm writing this wave, this wave.
Yeah. That wave, right?
Yeah. For real. Yeah. It's a real thing, man. It's for non-musicians. It's hard to communicate that, was hanging with my friends. Now, Citizens Band, we haven't played in about a year or so, but there would be times where, like, well, we don't have a gig for a while, so let's just jam. Or the bass player would start playing something, and we'd start kicking in with whatever, and sometimes it'd suck.
Yeah.
But sometimes it'd be like, oh, I'm glad. Did we tape that? Did we record that? Because we should develop this idea. Yeah. So yeah,
even I listened to, my punk band was not good. I was the singer in my punk band.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I just screamed and we were fast. Like, I don't even know if I could keep up the pace of the vocals and lyrics that at that time that I was doing, but we were not good. Very fast. So like one of the songs, I'll try and do it now, but I don't think I can even get up to speed, but it would be like, because I have to obviously have to be hyped up and amped up on stage, but the lyrics were like, I woke up this morning, caught up the flame. I looked in the mirror, didn't look so slim. There's an ulcer in my stomach. It's a fucking round pit. I'm something all that macaroni shit. I can't run a block. I just really suck. Peep, peep, peep. I feel 40 bucks. I can't do push-ups. I got much. I feel like it was that fast.
Right.
Yeah. Fast. And we were terrible. But when I listen to live tapes, live cassettes that I have recorded from our live shows when I was 16 years old and we were playing in front of 100 punk rock kids.
Yeah.
It's not the music. There is a fucking energy that comes out of that is like, oh, that's not human either. Like there was like our full teenage rage, angst, all of the emotion of being a teenager. Like you can feel it come out of the music. The music isn't good, but there's something that just draws you to it. Like, oh shit, these people are actually feeling emotions. And I find that interesting. Yeah.
And that would pull the emotion out of the people that were sitting there listening to it. They would start to feel it. It was cathartic. It passed through people, space and time. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, it's a real thing. It's a real thing.
People speaking, you spoke earlier of Dustin Perry. People would get mad because Dustin and I, when we would investigate together at events and things like that, Dustin and I will sing during our investigations. And people are like, what are you doing? And we're like, we're trying to contact another world. And if you would just relax and be goofy and sing along with us, like maybe something will sing along with us. Maybe like we can contact it that way. You don't have to sit alone in the dark and be like, how did you die? Was it terrible when they hung you? Like, who wants to talk about that? Like, I want to talk about how you're experiencing the other world. And maybe the way that I can do that is through singing you a lullaby or singing you a song. You know, we always talk about people are going to play trigger music. Well, you know, in the turn of the century, not a lot of people had, trigger music to play. They sat around a piano and they sang songs together, or they sat around a fire and sang songs together. And music is a very good way to bond with the people around you, which I think makes for a better investigation anyway.
One time I was at the Vliska house, and I was in there by myself, and I was thinking about the story. They came home from church that night, and I don't know if I'm trying to connect with, who knows? You know, I got my own ideas, and I don't even know what a ghost is.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So
no one does.
So I was like, well, they came home from church. So I started like whistling like hymns, you know, and I thought, well, maybe if they went to church and they were God-fearing people and they knew some hymns, you know, maybe they would either A, enjoy it, or B, maybe join in. Now, I didn't have great equipment, and I'm not really an equipment nut. I'm not a gearhead like a musician usually is. But I was just like, I hear people do these EVP sessions, and not to be a snob or anything, but I'm like, is this the entity that haunts this house? Speak. And, you know, I mean, like, if a guy's been dead for 100 and some odd years, he doesn't know what a digital recorder is. He doesn't know what the red light is. He doesn't know what an entity is. If he was like a bricklayer or something, you know, if he worked with his hands for all his life, he doesn't know what, you know what I mean? You kind of have to know your audience in a way.
For sure.
You know,
and that goes back to if our thoughts are discernible, because one of the things that I found is, like, I don't think they're hearing our voices anyway. I don't think that they're hearing the words that we're saying. I think they're hearing the intent of our question and kind of receiving it on that level. Well, so I do this experiment with people when I do large groups, where I'll have us all sit in a circle, and we'll put a recorder in the middle of us, and I'll ask a question, and then we're all holding hands, and the person next to me will ask the same question I asked. And eventually everyone at the table will have asked the same question, and then we'll listen to see if we got a response. Because the idea is, when you're doing an EVP session with 12 people, and each person is thinking of their question they're going to ask next after yours. So you're going to ask, when did you die? The person next to you is going to ask, like, how old were you? The person after them is going to ask. What you've done is you've flooded that thought intuition realm that they might be reading with 45 questions from people that are floating around people's minds. But if you get everyone synced up and they know they're going to ask the same question I asked, they know they're going to, and they're hearing it over and over, everybody's mind becomes focused on that one question. And together you collectively push it into that other realm, and then you get a response back from it. And it seems to work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I was reading your book, One Last Thing, and the responses that the investigator, I assume it's you, gets when asking the questions. What is time to a ghost? Maybe they hear it. Sometimes I think, I'm trying to form this question or this thought. Sometimes I think if there is a spirit out there and they're in a different realm, dimension, they don't have a tympanic membrane. They don't have an eardrum. It's not, my voice coming through my body out and making the sound waves isn't vibrating in their ear. For all I know, if they hear what I'm saying, it might be 5 minutes after I ask it. It finally makes its way through the spirit realm to their ear. Or it might sound like I'm underwater. Or you know what I'm saying?
In One Last Thing in that book, there are 2 or 3 different EVPs where my responses didn't make any sense until I realized they were answering the question I was about to ask. When I backed up their responses to my questions, as if they were answering the one I was about to ask. Then all the answers made sense. So they were actually answering one before me. They were in front of me. They knew what I was going to ask before I asked it. And so, I mean, that's the thing. Like, we don't know what ghosts are. We don't know what time is. We've got a very limited grasp on what seems to be a shared reality. And so to make these judgment calls that like, oh, he's going to know to turn the blue light on over the red light. Oh, she's going to know to tap when I tap. Like, that's the other, I've told people for years, like, one of the things that interests me the most, because we don't know how time works, is like, take these allegedly really haunted locations that have been haunted forever. Mm-hmm. And if we had good records of when events occurred, when someone heard tapping or rapping, when someone heard voices, when someone saw strange lights, was someone in the past seeing us investigating the place?
Right.
Were they hearing us tap and talk? And were they seeing our equipment floating around in the air? Were they seeing the lights from our recorders and our flashlights? Are we investigating ourselves in that sense? You know, if someone in the past is seeing us investigate now, and then they write down there's a ghost in the house, and then in the future we read a book about the ghost being in their house, we go and investigate, we're locked in this closed loop.
Yeah. I'll tell you a story. When I sold my childhood home, the night before the closing, I just kind of did the walkthrough for the next people that are going to have the house. And it was a split level, 900 square foot home, not a big house, just very modest. It's what my parents had. And my mom lived there for 40 years. 42 years. No, 40 years. Anyway, long story short. I walked around and looked, and I had my phone, and I kind of filmed every room because I cleaned it all out. And I touched the walls, opened up doors, and I listened to how the closet door creaks. And I how the light switches sounded, and did all these things in the house. And I was very emotional. 5 years from now, 10 years from now, will they see me touching the wall, crying, opening up a door just to see how, just one last time, I want to hear that creaky door, because every time I went into my childhood bedroom and I opened up the closet door, well, is that, it's spooky. It's weird, but I don't mean it to be. Is it me just kind of thinking back or imparting some energy, or what is time? Is it me? Could it be me if they see somebody walking through their house, kind of shadowy or whatever, just saying goodbye to the house,
There's an episode of my podcast, Realm of the Weird, which I had a case where a husband and wife were they bought a house, but one of the rooms seemed off to them, seemed haunted to them. So they called me in to figure out what was going on. And I did what I do, and I contacted previous owners of the house and couldn't really find anything. But there was one woman who had lived in the house previously that refused to talk to me. And I thought for sure, well, this is probably something that has to do with that room. And I called her, and she eventually said she would talk to me. And so she said, I don't like to talk about that house because when I was growing up there as a little girl, my bedroom upstairs, my father was very abusive, and he would lock me in the closet, and I would be locked in there for hours every single day. And it was very traumatic. And so I just don't like to talk about it. And I was like, that's fine. I understand. I don't think I told her, I don't think that's the room though, because there's no closet in that room. So like, it's something else, probably. It's not you. Well, when I pulled the architectural records of the house, there was a closet in that room, but it had been drywalled over. And we knocked the drywall down and found the closet. And she used to carve little flowers into the floorboards of the closet when she was a little girl in there. And we found the little flowers that she had carved in there and stuff. And I said, oh, so this is that room. This is the room where she had traumatic experiences. And this is the closet. And maybe now that we've opened it, and like maybe something will change. I got home that day, and there was a message on my answering machine from that woman. And she said, listen, maybe it was just talking to you and talking about the house, but something happened today. And I don't feel like that house has anything left for me anymore. I feel over. Maybe it was just talking to you and acknowledging the fact, but I just want to thank you for talking to me about it. And it was as if she was still haunting that room. And as soon as we opened it up and acknowledged it, like it let her go. And even though she was alive, she was haunting that house.
Yeah. Yeah. I hope to God I don't scare those people in that house. Because that wasn't my intent. I was having, I was just.
Do you hear ska music in this room?
Yeah, right. What's that lousy trumpet? I don't. From beyond the grave, Yeah,
Spirit trumpets.
Right, but I hope I don't scare those people because I was just saying goodbye, and maybe that, or maybe that energy left with me, or who knows, man.
Who knows?
Yeah. For all these years of investigation, I love the fact that you're like, nobody knows. Don't tell me this is what it is, or don't tell me this is that. And
declarative sentences in the world of paranormal, supernatural, occult, anomalistic research are, I don't have a lot of beliefs, but if I did have one, it would be locking yourself into an idea and thinking that it's true about this stuff is a very dangerous road to be on. Like, to put all of your chips in the basket that's a ghost. That, like, again, at my lectures, I tell people, if at a ghost lecture, I'll say to, the however many people are there, how many people here have seen a ghost? And they all raise their hand. And I go, but you've only ever seen what you think is a ghost. Like, we're each raising our hands thinking that we're all thinking the same thing, and we're all thinking a different thing.
Right.
So it's like no one is even in agreement on the fact of that they've seen a ghost, because I'll say, oh, I saw a ghost. Well, what do you mean by that? Did you see a shadow person? Did you see an angel? Did you see a guardian spirit? Did you see a demon? Did you see a jinn? Like, what did you see? Because even in the ghost realm, we've broken up the things that we don't understand into smaller components that we don't understand.
Yeah. And when they said this is that and this, I love Bigfoot stories. I have since I was a kid. And I bought my kids a little reader book about Bigfoot. And they even mentioned Bob Gimlin in there, which I think is, I'm like, Dad, perfect. Talk to that guy, So anyway, but I get pissed off when there's like, Bigfoot. Some people think Bigfoot is just one guy just walking around in the woods. One Bigfoot.
That drives me crazy, is people think that Bigfoot is a singular thing.
Well, how can there be? He'd be 100, he'd be 200 years. No. That's right. And I don't know what Bigfoot is. I hope there is a Bigfoot. I hope there is a giant forest creature. I hope there is an alien that looks like Bigfoot. I hope there is something that's conjured up by magical rites or something like that. But what gets me mad is these guys that go out, knock on wood, and they got a gun and they're ready to shoot this magical mystery of the ages. And I'm like, you guys are assholes, first of all, that want to go out. And I watched the old In Search Of episode, and there's that guy at the end. He's talking about, well, if we're going to prove it, we have to have a body. I'm like, you are a dickhead.
Yeah.
After all these years, I couldn't believe that's still out there.
If we don't find such an old kill, then the only alternative remaining is to kill one now. And grisly as that sounds, I think that is probably what we'll have to do.
And the thing that cracks me up the most is whenever there's a Bigfoot incident where, like, there's a hunter involved or someone with a gun, they can't pull the trigger because it looks so human to them.
Oh, yeah.
Like, your instinct is to not shoot a human being. And so, like, that's the other thing too. Like, I did a Bigfoot investigation in Kentucky 8 or 9 years ago, and the newspaper showed up and was like, oh, so you probably dressed someone up in an ape suit and is going to have them run around out in the forest. And I was like, listen, you might think that we're dumb, but how stupid would it be for me in Kentucky to put a man in an ape suit at a Bigfoot hunt where people are armed with rifles
and moonshine?
And there was moonshine. Yes, absolutely. Like, how stupid do you think we are? Like, someone would shoot at it probably because they're a little drunk and a little Bigfoot crazy.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's maddening to think that you're only going to be able to prove it by shooting it.
Yeah.
Again, I don't think, you might have heard me say this, and people hear me say certain things over and over again because they're just really kind of embedded into my thought process. But like, if there's no Bigfoot, if there's no UFO, if there's no ghosts, if there's nothing, if there's no magic, if there's no God, if there's no angels, nothing, if all those things are simply a mechanism with which we can talk to each other about our deep thoughts about our place within the universe and how we can interact with each other and how we exist here together, then it's still vastly fucking important. Like, even if they're not real, if they are only here for us to talk to and engage with each other, then that's fine by me.
I mean, you can go into social justice issues with the paranormal in terms of like, are ghosts racist? I mean, you say do ghosts wear underwear, but I mean, like, if you're investigating some place and you're an African American investigator, would a ghost have prejudice against you? And if they would, then what's that say about the afterlife? That it's not, you can't grow through the afterlife, spiritually, or if you're investigating some place and maybe it's got the spirit of African American people who have been treated horribly by Caucasian Americans, and they don't want to talk to you. How sad would that, you know what I'm saying? How sad that would be that you've gone into this great beyond, and yet we're still hampered by this human bullshit,
I think that's where, at least in the kind of paranormal ghost investigation realm, I think that's where like we can do a lot of good work, though. Like, again, Ghost Stalkers was originally supposed to be really talky, and we had some fairly deep conversations because every place that we went to, there was this narrative because of the way I think and talk. So like, one location was the former home of a doctor. And we got into a huge conversation about the medical practices back in the turn of the century and how that affected people and health and well-being of people and how they were treated. And there was a huge conversation about that. We went to a place called Holmesburg Prison, and we had a huge discussion about the injustices done by the prison system and the inequality of the prison system. And we did a location that was a former plantation, and we talked all about slavery, and the slave graveyard was actually built on a Native American burial ground. And we talked about the original inhabitants of North America and the war that went on the property. And these are all conversations that we should be having in the paranormal community. Like, they're very important because it shows you acknowledging the past, acknowledging mistakes of the past, acknowledging the good things that have happened from the past. But like, there's a history that we should know about, and paranormal television is just the worst place to do it. Like, they will not talk about it. They won't show it to you. They might touch it here and there, but like, they're not going to get into it. And a lot of shows too, we had a chance, which I turned down a lot of the times, most of the time actually, and it becomes problematic. Like, there was an episode of Ghost Stalkers, and one of the rooms at the prison that we went to, the warden and the junior warden had been murdered in that room. And it was in the 80s. Oh. And the family still goes there every year as a memorial to them. And when I saw the first cut of the episode, the prison warden is talking about that murder, and they show that room and they start throwing blood all over the walls in the episode. Like, there's blood splattering all over the place. And I went back to the network and I was like, what the fuck are you doing? Like, there are human beings that lost a loved one that are going to see this show, or someone they know is going to see this show. And you're showing the office they died in and splashing blood on the walls and showing like a hand falling on the floor covered in blood. And for a fucking ghost TV show, like, I'm not doing it. And they pulled it. They had to figure out how to fill that 30 seconds with something else. But like, there's a lot of people who don't stand up for that. And they're like, yeah, fuck it, do it. Just who cares?
Yeah.
Let's go investigate that place where someone died a year ago in a fucking horrific way. Like, that blows my mind.
Are they going to start having a paranormal show where they go into a COVID ward? It's sick. That's sick.
I'm surprised we're not to the point now. And it's going to come. We just have to prepare ourselves for this. But there's going to be a fucking paranormal show that investigates Ground Zero at 9/11. Like, it's going to happen. Like, they're going to do it. Like, you just have to prepare yourself for that, because that's what television is going to do. Someone's going to make either a full-length documentary about the hauntings of 9/11, and they're going to go to, Shanksville, and they're going to go to the Ground Zero, and they're going to do that. And they're going to investigate firefighters and police officers who died from the after effects. Like, it's going to be fucking terrible, and people will watch it and think it's great.
So television producers are your favorite people, is what you're saying.
I am very There's a reason I'm not on TV right now. I am very problematic. The last time I pitched a show, which was only about a year ago.
Damn you and your conscience, Tenney.
I know. I pitched a show about a year ago. I put together the sizzle reel, which is, your pitch to the network, show proof of concept.
Yeah.
And I pitched it to them, and they said, well, we'll bounce it around the room and see what people think about it. Because they want to work with you. Like, they had been telling me for a couple of years, like, we need to put you on a show. Like, we need your brain. And I was like, that's fine. This is what I want to do. This is the show. And I showed it to them, and they were like, we love it. Let's get it through the channels and make it happen. And so, like, a month went by, 2 months went by. And I said, so what's going on with that? And they're like, well, people have been out of the office. We're just waiting for them to come back. So another month goes by. I get a phone call, and they're like, can there be a monster in this? And I said, there's no monster in it. This is a UFO show.
Oh,
I'm like, there's no monster.
Oh,
I'm like, there's no monster in it. They're like, well, doesn't Michigan have this? And I'm like, no. There's no monster in it. And I don't want to do the show anyway. And they were like, well, what do you mean you don't want to do the show? I'm like, I don't want to do it. Like, at all. And they were like, but we're going to do it. And I was like, no, you're not. I don't want to work with you. You've been paid for 3 months to figure out whether or not I should be paid. I have not been paid for 3 months.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
Now you want to change it before I've even started doing it. I've been down this road. The thing is, and this, for no matter how this sounds, I've worked in television longer than most producers at television networks right now. Like, I started working for Unsolved Mysteries 30 years ago. A lot of people who are now in positions of power at networks are 35 and 36 years old, like, and making decisions based on what the scariest movie is and how can we turn that into a television show in the cheapest way and the most sensationalized way. And it blows their mind when someone says, I don't want a fucking television show. Don't worry about it. Like, how are you going to turn down television? I'm going to turn it down because I figured out how to do this without television.
Hellier, they did that themselves, and,
Yes.
and it's gotta be for guys like you that are proactive in making content or have ideas for content, like, have really thought about it, like making something with, some heart and some in their brains. Is that like kind of the new kind of realm? I mean, it seems like Hellier, they did it themselves and found a place to put it, and it's getting seen and it's getting accolades, and it's an important show. And I know you're buddies with the Newkirks that put it together, and you make an appearance on there and everything. Is that kind of like the future of responsible paranormal content?
I mean, it is to the degree of, like, I have no doubt that had it not been for COVID, you would have seen a network version of Hellier by now. Like
ripped off? You mean like a rip off?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes. Because something that was made and was so genuine and good and responded to fairly well by the community. How can you monetize that? Like, I had a producer call me. I talked to Greg and Dana about this, and we laughed about it because this producer called me up and he was like, the guys from Hellier, like, we've got to do something. We've got to get it on the network. And he said, how did they monetize that? And I said, they gave it away for free on YouTube. And like you could hear the phone clunk to the floor. Like that's the worst fucking business model in the world. Like you're going to give it away on YouTube? I'm like, yeah, well, I mean, you can buy it for the first couple of weeks on Amazon, but then after that, they're just going to give it away for free.
Yeah.
And like their minds fucking exploded because it's about money. And that's why you see shows right now, like the easiest shows in the world to make, which don't cost anything, are you film people in their homes with their own cameras, or you send a camera crew out for one day and you show them YouTube videos and then have them comment on it. And then an editor puts together 10 episodes of it. And there you go. You've got, you know, a new UFO show, a new ghost show, a new monster show. And, you know, you didn't have to have a full cast. You didn't have to have location shoots. Audio men didn't have to travel around the country. Cameramen didn't have to travel around the country. Cheap, easy.
It's like that Dave Chappelle character. He's like, hey, you got any more of those goblins?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So yeah, the future of getting the word out, the paranormal word. I mean, are you motivated? I know you can't go out and do your live events and things like that. What's the future of John E.L. Tenney? You know, like what? I mean, not specifically, but I mean, are you thinking like a show, a documentary, something?
I never know what. Like, I really don't. I never know what the universe is going to hand me or in what form. Like I think about all the time, like I'm going to start another podcast this year. I've already kind of announced that. It's just a really silly podcast. It has nothing to do with the paranormal. It's literally just me talking on the phone to a friend of mine. Like that's the whole podcast.
I think I mentioned this to you in an email or something like that. I'm like, where's The Oddest? Because that was... Yeah. The Odyssey was super funny, man. And is it down? Did you take it down? Is it?
I think the site I had it hosted on, like, I don't think I renewed like the space okay. like for it. Because the Odyssey was from 2005 or 2006.
I know.
So, I mean, when the Odyssey first came out, this is the thing that cracks me up now about podcasts. When the Odyssey first came out, it took me like 6 months to get it on iTunes. Because iTunes was like, you have to have 12 episodes finished.
Oh,
you have to have this, you have to have this, you have to have this, because they didn't know if podcasts were even going to be a thing.
Right.
And they didn't want to take up their bandwidth and their space for something that might disappear.
Who's going to listen to people talk all day?
Yeah, who's going to listen to that? But I mean, I'm starting a new podcast, but I think to myself all the time, like, is it going to be a book? Is it going to be a documentary? But I never know. Like someone just contacted me today, like, and they were like, I'm doing a book about paranormal researchers and I want to do a chapter on you. Would you be up for that? And I said, yeah, sure. So like, that's one thing that's going to happen. And then my friend Josh, my friend Josh Malerman is the author of Bird Box. Oh. I don't know if you know.
Oh yeah. He just had a sequel out too, right?
Yep, Mallory just came out. The sequel to that.
Yeah.
So Josh is making movies now, and Josh was like, "Do you want to make a horror film with me?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, an independent horror film." So we'll do that this year. But like, it just comes how it comes. Like I don't plan for it, and I do what I do. And if someone is interested, then you know, like I said, if someone asks me to do something weird and it's safe, I say yes.
The universe comes calling, and John's like, "Hold my beer, let's do it."
Yeah, for sure. I've even started thinking about recording music again.
Wow. Hey, see? There you go.
That's a big one.
Fantastic. When I decided to reboot this podcast, it was a group show talking about movies and everything. And then COVID came and movies dried up. And when I decided to reboot it, what I wanted to do was kind of do a little introspection. I wanted to learn more about the weird, wonderful universe that's out there through conversations and through reading and absorbing content in different ways. And having you on the program, John, has just been a real great experience. I've enjoyed laughing with you. I've enjoyed just chatting with you about music, the weird, wonderful world that's out there. I really appreciate your philosophy on things. And I really like the fact that I know you joke around that you say like, well, you're not a salesman and you're horrible at promotion and stuff like that. But there's just a real, an honesty, you know, you're genuine. And I really hope that when I keep having conversations that I still have this much excitement about having a conversation with other people as I've had this conversation with you. I mean it, honest to God.
I appreciate that. I never have understood why I am able to do what I do. I think that the one thing that growing up with my parents and friends and the life that I've had has made it like when we are genuine with each other and when we talk to each other and when we're just open with each other, like that is where we learn stuff, like whether it's about ghosts or not, like we learn that we're these crazy little things that live on this planet and we're all here together. And we realize like that we're not different. Like as you're talking, I hear things that spark off my head. Oh, I have something like that too. And I'm sure that happens to you. And that's why we need to have conversations and talk. And that's why it behooves us to be genuine with each other, like to not create false personas and to not like, I'll tell you, I'm as fucked up as anybody else. But you know, it's true. Like I needed to talk to you. Like it was one of those things. I got your email and I was like, I spent all day. I don't have any secrets. I don't care if you leave this in, but like my mother passed away last week. And I've just been like trying to get things in order and get my dad into shape. And, you know, they were married for 55 years and met in high school. And I was like, no, like the gift that I got from my parents was learning how to talk to people and sharing with people, sharing who I am, because we're each, this is another thing I say, it becomes kind of tropish, but like our commonality is our individuality. Like we are each unique, beautiful individuals. And that's what we have in common, is that we're all different. And if we could see our difference as our commonality, I think that would bring us a lot closer together.
Amen, brother. John, thank you so much for being on the program. I had a fantastic time talking to you. It's going to give me a lot to ponder as I put this together and give this information out for other people to listen to and enjoy. So
thanks for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, hopefully we can have him on again sometime and we'll talk about punk rock and movies. And we didn't really get into a lot of horror movies. We'll save that for next time. But
yeah, I've got a lot of horror movie stuff I need to talk about.
Fantastic. Everybody, thank you for listening to this episode of the Necronomicast. There he is, ladies and gentlemen, for your listening pleasure. That was John E. L. Tenney making his debut on the Necronomicast. That was so much fun to put together. Oh my God. And it took a while for it to put together, too. John is super busy, had a lot going on in his private life, had a lot going on in his public life, even with the pandemic going on. But to have that opportunity to sit down with John and pick his brain for an hour and a half, whoo boy. If you haven't gone and listened to John's podcast, The Realm of the Weird, it's required listening as far as I'm concerned. 13 episodes that he put together of strange, weird, well-produced episodes. And he says they're all true. And I believe him. Coming up next on the Necronomicast, we're going to go back into the crazy world of true crime with probably the weirdest and strangest true crime story that you've heard in years. And it all took place in Omaha, Nebraska. The Haunted Heartland. Imagine that. Episode number 197 will feature true crime author Leslie Rule and her book, soon to be on paperback, A Tangled Web. So this was episode number 196 with John E. L. Tenney. Go visit John over at weirdlectures.com and check out anything that he's been a guest of in the past. It's required listening. This episode, copyright 2021. All rights reserved. Now, I see the sun starting to come up over the horizon. It's time to get some sleep.